Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody in this room and online to this SOCU Open Conversation Navigating Power in International Interactions, a view across languages and cultures. My name is Barbara de Kock. I'm professor in Spanish linguistics at UC Louvain, and I'm also SOCU chair at the Democracy Knowledge Hub of SOCU, which is the European University Alliance that UC Louvain is part of. If you are joining us today, then you've probably already read our introduction, which points out that power relations are, of course, shaped partly by political, economical, military relations, but they also very much created in the way in which we interact with each other. One of the ways in which languages do is by the way we address each other. We can use different pronouns. English has you, but languages like French, for instance, has two forms, tu and vous. So this is already a difference that we can find between different languages. Also, the use of titles to refer to people can vary a lot across languages. Do you use titles such as doctor, such as the political role of a person to address them? So not all languages have the same system, and moreover, they don't use the same system necessarily in the same way in similar contexts. So this creates a lot of challenges, and we think it's important to address them in a world where there's increasing mobility for students, for professors, but also for all kinds of professional workers, and also in political life. So we want to address these kind of challenges of how power relations are interactually created across languages today. And for that, we have a panel in the room and also online, which my colleague Maria Sampedro will now present to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for attending this open conversation. Today, next to me, we are pleased to introduce Bettine Kluge, who's a professor at the Institute of Translation Studies and Specialized Communication at the Hildesheim University. And her research focused, among other topics, on migration linguistics, interactional social linguistics, and contrastive linguistics. We also count on Johanna Iso-Savi, who's associate professor of French at the University of Helsinki, and her research focuses on pragmatics, especially contrastive and intercultural pragmatics, covering politeness, address forms, and gender-inclusive languages. We have also Ariana Moreira, who's a master's student in political science and international relations at UC Louvain here. And she's a student fellow of the Circle EU Democracy Knowledge Hub. And we're pleased to introduce Mette Zollner, who's joining us online. Hello, Mette. She's a professor of intercultural studies in the Department of German and Romance Languages at the Aarhus University, and her research interests cover qualitative social research and sociological theory. And finally, it's me. My name is Maria Sampedro Mella, and I am a postdoctoral researcher here at UC Louvain. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So as I said in introduction, we will look into different types of context, and we'll start with one that is very familiar to us, the academic context, because we are or have all been students, and quite a lot of us are also teaching. And moreover, we think this is really an important question to address for SOCU. It's University Alliance that very much encourages its students to go abroad, to participate in summer courses, blended intensive programs, etc. abroad. And so we think that addressing how these power relations and may be realized differently in interactions abroad is really important. So we would like to start with Bettine, maybe. What would be your personal experience on differences in ways in which students and professors address each other? You've worked in different countries, you've studied in different countries, so we think we would be really interested in hearing what you have to say about this.
Yeah, thank you. I think in Germany, most of us teachers use the Hamburger Sie, which is the V form, so the formal form Sie, but with the first name to make it more accessible. And I think that is something that is quite often the case. You also find some professors or some teachers who use the last name, but I think quite a few of us do that way. Now, I have a problem with Spanish Erasmus students, I must confess, because they are not used to that, and we've talked about it this morning precisely. The Spanish at university students often use "tú" also with their teachers, so the more informal form. And of course, when they go abroad, that is precisely what they're also kind of expecting with us. And in the case of the language department, we have Spanish language teachers who might also, go along with that stereotype that also in Germany we are using the T form with our students. And so, for some time I tried out with the system that I'm using with my German students, like Sie and first name. And I saw their irritation, so I'd switched to "tú" and first name. But then, of course, you have some Erasmus students who stay for a second semester, and they become quite proficient in German. And then suddenly they start talking to me in German. And then it becomes really strange, because in that moment, should I be switching to Sie with them? A person that, like 2 weeks ago, I had used "tú" with. And I'm still not quite sure. And of course, sometimes now I stay with the "do" or stay with "do" with that person. But then, of course, the other students also look like, what is she doing? Why is she using "do" with that student and not with the other ones? So it is kind of mixed up, and I'm still not quite sure what to do with that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for sharing this. We'll move now to Ariana. Maria introduced you and told you're studying here, but you're actually from Portugal, so you are here also already in an international experience, and you have other international experience before this. So what is your take on this?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So in Portugal, it's quite common that when we address our teacher, we say, teacher Barbara, for example, first name. And when I did my Erasmus in Belgium 3 years ago, I was doing the same here. I was sending all my emails saying, hey, teacher Michel. And I really needed someone to explain me that in Belgium, well, in a French system, it's a bit different, that we should say Madame and after the family name. And no one ever, my teachers, they were acting normally to this, except one of them that once wrote me an email that he wanted me to treat him not only by his family name, but also by his title. Because, so in French, we would say Monsieur Liégeois. And he wanted me to say Monsieur le Professeur Liégeois. Sometimes we can have those cultural shocks, but what I learned through my international experience is that we should adapt our behavior accordingly the person we have in front of us. And to do that, of course, first, we should expect that the person also has this open mind, let's say. But it's something we construct by repetitive interactions with this person, asking or imitating others, how they treat the teachers, their students, etc. And even with students, when I first arrived here in Belgium, I was treating them by vous instead of tu, that is more informal, and it's how normally students treat each other here in most of the countries. But since I learned how to speak French in a specific way, it was also difficult for me to change this and to start treating them by tu. And so I noticed that if I didn't do this change in my language, I would already establishing distant contact with my colleagues. And so it was something important to me also to develop.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing this experience. I think you clearly pointed out that the repetitiveness is important. If it's a one-off, then you have less the opportunity maybe to learn this. but also less cause to maybe have potential problems. And yeah, as you said, maybe in your case, some people explicitly told you that it's done the other way. And I think this is one of the challenges we have, which Bettina also already raised. You want to be kind to people coming, but maybe at some point the kindness is also kindly explaining how a different system works, and yeah, being aware that if someone does something that looks weird in your own system, it is because it's not what they grew up with. We'll now go to our colleague online, to Mette, who is, yeah. Yeah, Mette, we know you. I know you also studied in various different places, and you're currently teaching in Denmark. We would be really happy to hear your view on this.
Yes, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you for this really good initiative, and of course also thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to participate, and I can definitely recognize some of the examples that you have already given. But I probably will stress a little bit that in Denmark we are likely to have a more informal way of interacting. We have only one address form, tu in French, and this is what we use also in academic settings. However, I'm affiliated with a master program which is international, so I have students from all European countries, US, Latin America, and also South Asia. So in the beginning of an academic year, I am used to being addressed by professor, by madam, and also by first name. For me, it's not a problem. You can say it would be strange otherwise, because students just arrive. They have to get used to a different way of interacting with faculty. So this is not a problem. It might be a challenge now and then for some of the students who are not used to this informal way of interacting, of course. But as time goes by, what we see is that some negotiated agreement practices of how to interact will emerge among students themselves, and of course also among them and also as a faculty. What is more of a challenge, I think, is, you can say, the academic traditions that are institutionalized in study regulations. And here we don't have so much margin for negotiating what to do. Yeah? So specific way of teaching, like very interactive teaching styles, like exams, more project-oriented, where students are expected to define themselves, their problem that they want to work on. Here we can have some challenges. And in a way, you can say that these ways of working in a Danish setting, where we don't have a lot of lecturing, we don't have any multiple choice, and we do expect a lot of independence from our students. That is also, you can say, a way of stressing that when you construct ways of interacting which is very equal and informal.
Thank you so much, Mette. We now go to Johanna, who's here sitting next to me. You teach in Finland, but you've also lived in very different places.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting to hear what the others had to say. Yes, we are teaching in French, all our classes, and so we address the same students differently according to the language. If I'm teaching them in French, I will be using the French equivalent of the Hamburger-Sie. So it's vouvoiement avec les prénoms, so first names and vous. And this is because we want the students to be able to practice a little bit the formal V forms, because like in Denmark, like in Nordic countries, it's the T forms that we use in our everyday activities. So it's very, very little vous. V forms, maybe you address the president or old people who don't always like it. So, but I've been thinking, because I'm a Finn, and I've been also studying a little bit the address forms by the French teachers and the students, and I know that colleagues also who are L1 speakers of French, they have different strategies. Some like to use the T forms towards the students, some like to use the V forms. So I've been thinking if I should get to the D form, but there's this pedagogical question also that they are able to practice these forms. If I'm speaking to these same students after classes, if I help them with their work, usually we speak Finnish, and then of course I will say the informal T form, first names if needed. So it's same students, different strategies, and no problem in that way. We do have international students, and as the others said, they have their own practices that they bring to us. For instance, we have a doctoral student who comes from an African country, and I find his emails, his greeting, his addressing towards me quite sympathetic. Bonjour, Professor Johanna. Yeah, okay, I don't mind, and I haven't said that, okay, you should use something else, because I think it kind of shows his background. Of course, if he started asking me questions about it, I could explain the differences. So these kind of intercultural differences exist, but I think it's a question of negotiation and preferences, and I don't know, as I also get older, maybe I start using the T forms also in French. We'll see.
Yeah, okay, thank you for sharing the experience, as I think it may be important, and it's one of the reasons why we held this open conversation, to make everyone aware of these differences. I think it's not always a reflex to think when someone addresses you in a way that feels a bit weird, to bear in mind that it is actually what is normal for them in a language or culture that they are more acquainted with. So yeah. Okay, we talked quite a lot about teaching contexts, but obviously there are also some other interesting contexts we would like to talk about. And next was more professional life and the management sector. Mette has worked a lot on this. So Mette, we know that Denmark is a country with a reputation for treating employees within a company very much on being on an equal footing. And I wanted to ask you whether this makes it easier for foreigners who come to work to Denmark.
Yes, this is a good question. Denmark does indeed have this reputation that in work settings, hierarchies are flat, employees are empowered, there's a lot of openness and talk about work-life balance. And when we look at also at different happiness reports that come out every year, Denmark also score in the top. And those are reports that pay a lot of attention to social support, community, and trust. So this is indeed the reputation in Denmark, and it's also a reputation that is cultivated a lot by employers that are in need of attracting from outside Denmark. And there's been quite an important increase in the Danish labor market of non-Danish employees the last 20 years. And now we reach, in average, about 14%. What I would like to stress here, and to answer your question, Barbara, is to say it's important to talk about it as a reputation, and perhaps we can even call it an ideal. It's kind of the Danish ideal for living together. There's the idea that to live well together, it's good that we have a lot of equality and that we don't necessarily show a lot of or mark the differences that exist. And you can say if you just always use tu, and you don't have a title, and there's not so many forms of politeness, those are practices that are used to creating spaces or places of at least seemingly equality. But that doesn't imply, of course, that there are no power symmetries in Danish society, or for that sake, in companies or any other workplaces. It's just that they are less visible, and there can be this tendency to downplay the differences that exist there, for instance, in hierarchies, in managerial responsibility. So as they are less visible, they might also be more difficult to navigate within. And I think this is what many non-Danes experience in a Danish labor market. You can say the classic is this misunderstanding that as the boss doesn't give a direct order, but just a kind suggestion or raise a question, you might not understand that this is actually an order, or the fact that your boss or your manager is not controlling every day what you have performed. This doesn't mean that he doesn't follow what you're doing, but perhaps simply that he trusts you and believes that you will come to him if you have a problem. So those are some of the, you can say, classic misunderstandings that we hear from non-Danes in a Danish context, in Danish workplaces.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really interesting to see that what at first sight you could applaud and say, okay, everybody's more on equal footing, may raise other challenges that are maybe a bit less visible for the non-Danes, and in a way maybe also for the Danes concerning their non-Danish colleagues. Thank you. We'll now move on to discussing political context. We live in a political context where conventions concerning how to interact with each other have been shifting quite a lot over the last few years, also in international politics. But regardless of that, there have always been differences between the ways in which politicians in different countries interact with each other. Johanna, you are just wrapping up a big, very interesting project on how different parliaments work in that respect.
Yes, thank you for the question, Barbara. We in my project we have studied parliamentary debates in Finland, in Germany, and in France, and there are many differences in addressing practices. For instance, in French and German, the MPs, when they talk in parliamentary debates, they use the gendered titles, Monsieur, Madame, Herr, Frau, often with a surname. Whereas in Finland, we don't do that at all. I mean, those forms did not occur in our dataset at all. But in those very formal settings, we use institutional titles like the minister and so on. So yeah, the very informal Nordic countries. So what happens when the politicians interact? I haven't studied it personally, but there's been a lot of media coverage because our current president, Mr. Alexander Stubb, knows many languages. He's Finn, whose L1 is Swedish. Of course, his Finnish is excellent, and he's been studying abroad, and he knows English and French and German, so it's not very common for a Finn to know so many languages. And when he has been doing visits, for instance, to France, and you see videos there, I mean, he's given interviews in fluent French, and it's been a lot of media coverage, not only in Finland, but also in France. And as an address researcher, I was very curious to see the videos and what kind of contact the address forms showed that he was having with President Emmanuel Macron. And in the beginning of the video, when Macron welcomes our President Stubb, he says, Monsieur le Président, cher Alexandre. So it kind of shows there is this formality. Okay, I acknowledge you as the leader of another country. But then you see that they do have a personal contact. And what was our president's response? He was also using cher Emmanuel. So, yeah, in a way, it's building connections, rapport building. How do you do? And you can see a lot from these addressing forms also in these public settings, because you might not always see that maybe they know each other very well. I mean, when they are talking outside the cameras. But that was quite interesting that you could really see that as well. And maybe the fact that Alexandra Stupu is so fluent in French also contributed to this kind of more informal rapport and connection.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting case, and indeed it also shows the interaction between, in this case, language competence in a language that is maybe not known by all Finnish presidents, and how it could contribute to the way in which his interaction with French-speaking leaders is being construed. Yeah, absolutely. As I already said, we have a lot of changes going on in how politicians interact. I would like to comment with you an example, a fairly recent example of the current NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, who, as you know, he has been interacting a lot with Donald Trump concerning the position of the United States in NATO, or the attitude of the different countries. And, when referring to Trump, he at some point said, sometimes daddy has to be angry. Mark Rutte was very much criticized for this comment, since it suggested that he called Trump daddy, and so sort of saw it as a father figure, or attributed him some sort of fatherly competence or authority. And Mark Rutte was heavily attacked for this comment. On the Dutch television, he then explained this as a language problem. So he came up himself with that explanation. He referred to a Dutch expression which would say sometimes daddy or father has to be angry. And he said he was actually using that. I have to say I'm a Belgian Dutch speaker. It doesn't really ring a bell. I see mitigated reactions between the Dutch speakers in the room concerning this expression. But I thought it was interesting that he came up himself with this possible language interference of his mother tongue as a possible explanation for something that was very much seen as a faux pas in international interactions by various NATO members in that particular context. I would like to move maybe to a final major topic, but I think which concerns increasingly a lot of us, which is the issue of how gender interacts with how people address each other and how they are being addressed. I'd first would like to go to Bettina. I know you've done work on how people can be addressed differently depending on their gender.
Yeah. We studied the difference between several languages, Romance languages, and we found out that if I say we, it's not a royal we, just to be sure. It is two colleagues of mine and me. And I was contributing the Spanish competence, and another one the French one, and another one the Brazilian Portuguese one. And basically what we were looking at were the huge differences in those languages that are actually pluricentric languages. And so the speech communities have different acceptance of the way they treat the question of using inclusive language, gender for language or not. And for example, in French, you have the French, you have Belgian French, you have Quebec French, and that is quite on different levels how to, if you say, for example, Madame le Président or Madame la Présidente, or if you use a neo pronoun like il, or in German we have sie, which is a concatenation of sie and the female and the male third singular. And so I think it's quite interesting to see that we have different speech communities that choose different ways, basically, and within the same language. Basically, it's what I find interesting as well is to see how genderful language is made is drawn into something like a cultural war, and we have this political backlash against it. Same with renewable energy, for example, or dietary habits, so that this is being seen as as something that can show that a person is progressive or more on the conservative part. Also the gender star, and I can't really understand how this has become such a pinpointing in those political biases that are being drawn up. Maybe we can talk about the gender star later on, but I think there's other people who also have something to say on that, like Johanna, for example.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you one more question, because I know you also worked in Austria, and so KU has a German and an Austrian university. Would you think that there are clear differences between the two countries, or do they very much share their choices in this respect?
No, it's quite different sometimes. There's a saying that what is making up a difference between Germany and Austria is just the language. Especially the use of titles, I think is, well, the stereotype at least is that Austria is much more title prone, but then on the other hand, our colleagues in Australia who had done also a study on the pluricentric languages, especially on German, show that in some contexts even the Germans are more title conscious, let's say it that way. Yeah. But in addressing somebody, I think it's always safe to say that the Austrians really enjoy the professor, doctor, etc.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, as Bettina already said, Johanna, you have, after the wonderful project on parliamentary debate, you've started recently a project on different varieties of French and how they use gender inclusive language. Maybe you can explain a bit what you are doing in this project.
Yes, we are studying egalitarian grammar in global Frenchies. So the idea is to compare uses of gender-inclusive language, not only in Europe, in French-speaking countries such as France, Belgium and Switzerland. I also did a research visit last year in Montreal, so in Quebec. And, well, depending if we get a funding, the plan is also to go to Africa. We have one possibility to do some research there. So yes, Bettina said that, well, I can just summarize that gender inclusive language takes into account that language should not discriminate against anyone, not against females, not against non-binary people, and in those gendered languages, such as French, it is a little bit more challenging than in Finnish. In Finnish, we don't have, we only have one pronoun, one third person pronoun, which is gender neutral. So we don't differentiate between il and el and those kind of things. So yes, we are looking how, like, they take into account. Have other solutions for generic masculine, so how to include the feminine forms and also these new forms.
Okay, thank you. Bettina, you briefly brought up the issue of using a title or not to address someone. And I know you previously also worked on cases where women was being very differently addressed than men. This is something that has also been documented. Maybe you can explain this to us.
You refer to the famous Anita incident?
Yes, the famous Anita incident, yes.
Right. Yes, that was an article I wrote a couple of years ago, and it is a political interview in Spanish breakfast TV, and a political journalist, Ana Pastor, was interviewing the president of Ecuador at that time, Rafael Correa. And the thing is that, so we have different social roles there. Like the interviewer usually is the one who is in the command seat because she is asking the questions. But then on the other hand, you have a president of another nation, and so there were quite some issues at hand there on who was gaining the upper hand. Ana Pastor was always well, both of them used usted, so the V form, but then Ana Pastor used presidente just to interrupt and ask the next question. And she was also getting irritated because already at the beginning, Rafael Correa called her Anita, so the diminutive form, not Ana, but Anita, and the diminutive, is mostly, it's a term of endearment if you want, but then on the other hand, you also only use it towards, well, people who you think maybe are inferior, or maybe like children, or in this case, women. And so that was at hand, and the tension was going up until at one point Ana Pastor was saying something that I'm the one in command who is asking the questions, because Correa also wanted to ask something of her, and then on the other hand, but by the way, my name is not Anita, and so I was analyzing what was going on there, and then also the aftermath, let's say it that way, the way that was being negotiated in the media and also on social media. And it was quite interesting to see how, on the one hand, you had this one opinion that, of course, in such a professional context, you should not use a term of endearment like Anita. And the other ones who are saying that, well, he just wanted to create a nice atmosphere. And of course, then there's the issue that in Latin America, the diminutive is used a lot more often than in Spain. And so you also got something like, well, maybe a post-colonial perspective on it, in the sense that, of course, that Ecuadorian variety has the same right, and of course they have different norms, but they are not less than the Spanish norms in that case. So it was quite interesting to see that there are reasons for both of them, and I think the social roles at play here are quite intertwined, and I can't really say what was going on either, and maybe that was just the point. Because of course you can also see, if you have an opportunity to first try to get to some conversational point, and if you get a backlash or some reprehension, then you can just step away again and say, well, it was just something that was quite natural to my variety of the language.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's really an interesting example, which, as you say, combines issues maybe related to gender, but also two varieties of Spanish, well, in this case, of one language, so in this case, Spanish. So yeah, I think there was an incident that created a lot of buzz in Spanish media, and rightly so. Ariana, I let you add some. Yeah.
Thank you. About that incident, I'm not especially familiarized with, but something I noticed in Portugal is that we tend way more often to address women by their diminutive, and not so much with men. Like in schools, I remember that all the workers there, so for a man we were going to say sir and his family name, and for a woman we would say dona. And imagine that her name was São, we would say Dona Sãozinha, and never the opposite. And still returning to inclusive language, my question about that is, what is interesting about inclusive language is to make us think how we see the world through language. So where in our little interactions daily, the way we address a woman or a man reflects something behind, maybe that we are not very conscious about it. Why we treat a woman with her diminutive and not a man? Why do we tend to address women maybe by her first name and a man by his family name, the titles, all of that? Just a particular experience of mine, in Lisbon, I had a professor that was a non-binary person. And it was easy to talk with this person. But when I was talking about this person to someone else, there the problem was starting. Because I was saying, oh, he, she, I couldn't talk about this person in an inclusive way. And one day we brought this subject to the class, and my teacher said that traditionally in English we were saying Miss or Madame accordingly if the woman was married or not. And someone asked, and how were they knowing the woman was married or not? And the teacher said, well, they were asking her. And he gave this example to say that maybe it could be a nice idea to start asking the person, how would this person would like to be treated? And as you were saying before, I don't understand either why this question of inclusive language is so buzz in social media and in the public sphere. But it's still interesting to make us reflect how we see the world through this gender framework.
Can I continue from that? Yes, because I have a recent study under review with a colleague from Quebec related to my research visit there last year. And because there's been a lot of media coverage in Quebec, there was one teacher who did not like to be called Madame X, so they suggested to be called Mix, MX. And well, the school was okay with that. They sent a letter to the parents, but then there was a media incident and a lot of polemics in the social media that this can't be right. And a lot of like comments about that. And there are many things happening in Quebec, and the government is very conservative, and the political leaders, and they made a decision in 2025 that starting from 2026 at schools, the teachers should be called with Madame or Monsieur, and the V form is obligatory. And so when I was studying gender inclusive language, I asked a few questions related to these media incidents, and I was interested in how young adults, university students, feel about this. And overall, the results were quite positive. They haven't been published yet because the study is under review. But these young adults, they usually didn't have much experience about gender inclusive language. They didn't know about these new forms, and some of them hadn't followed this media coverage at all. But what they said, they had a very big tolerance attitude. They said that, who am I to say to somebody how you want to be addressed? I'm not changing your first name either. So they were kind of having this respect that, okay, if someone wants to be addressed other way, I will respect that. And, well, my colleague said that, of course, this doesn't represent the whole society and not also the whole generation of young adults. Of course, it's like a more educated people. But still, I think it kind of gives you some hope that maybe in the future there will be more tolerance and more diversity. But still, it's quite interesting that the political atmosphere there is very much against, and now that they see that things are happening, a language is becoming more and more inclusive, they want to stop that. And in that study, we also asked how do the participants feel about these new decisions, and many kind of noticed that, well, it's kind of a clever way. They didn't forbid like mixed or other gender fair forms, but instead they made the gendered titles obligatory. And there were some of the participants who also noticed that this is a really, a clever, in a way, to take the attention away from the real problems at school, and now we're doing something, and they were really attacking the gender fair language.
Okay, thank you for sharing this ongoing research. Yeah, I think what Ariane said is really important. This may be especially important to start thinking about what is behind the way in which we address people regarding gender issues, but also the previous topics we discussed. There's always more to it than just the form, and that's really what we want to draw attention to. Maria, you wanted to add? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to continue. And just simply point out that despite all this significant improvement, there are still some gender asymmetries. And in some studies, it has been proved that women tend to be addressed more with the informal forms than men. And this has been proved in Peninsular Spanish, in European Portuguese as well, and also in French. So we still need to continue to fight for this gender equality, also in second-person address forms.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Bettina, you wanted to add on? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we should open that up to rethink all this in the terms of accessibility of information, because I think in some cases we sometimes just focus a lot on certain parts, like for example the neopronouns, or maybe the gender star in German or something like that, or the use of e or of x in Spanish, you know. And while on the other hand, what we don't see is that there are so many more options to make a text less gendered, maybe, or also less open. Because I think that currently, at least in Germany, I have the impression that sometimes texts are just written as always, and then I need to put in the gender, and then they just put in the gender stars, and of course those are bad texts. We really have to admit that text does not really read well, and I think it is something like an opportunity to really redo the entire text and maybe see how else can I really rephrase that, and maybe that is better to be understood by everybody, also by people who are not really into, for example, administrative text. If you get a text report or something like that from your local government, it's not really easy to read. And so maybe really we should take that as an invitation to redo all these informations that we give out.
Yeah, I think it's very important, as you say, to open this up to the much broader issue of text accessibility, which is definitely a part. We're nearing the end, so I also would like to take some time to leave room for questions, either from the people online or from the people in the room. We have Lucie who's managing the online questions, so if anybody online has a question, you can make yourself known and we can transmit it. In the meantime, are there questions in the room? Not immediately. See whether someone online has a further question. No? Okay.
Well, it was already said.
Oh, I was going to say all clear, yeah. I know we know
Maybe Mette wants to say something.
Yeah. Okay, Mette, it's good to yeah, we don't see you all the time on screen in the room, so maybe we'll let you then at least already give some final words and see whether in the meantime someone wants to type a question. And we'd like to, if you would like to add something to the last topics we discussed.
Yes, of course, with pleasure. I couldn't hear everything, but I think what I would like to add in the end, we have spoken a lot about different languages and therefore also different cultures, very often related also to nations. Though, of course, there are also differences within languages. So I think what is important also to stress here in the end is that these negotiations that we are talking about, which address forms to use, whether it is in terms of gender or any other kinds of addresses, it's ongoing processes. They are being negotiated, but not just within languages. They are also being negotiated in some of these more international settings that you have given as examples. And I think that is important to stress. When we go out into the world today, whether we are in university settings, in workplaces, or in more diplomatic settings, there are negotiations going on. now and then these negotiations, they lead to a nice compromise. We find a way to interact and to agree. And other times, and some of your examples have also illustrated that, then we have conflicts and we have people who are strategically and very discursively also using address forms and other ways of interacting as a way of dominating. And I think what we see right now is really that there's a tendency in the world. We have the manosphere, we have the neoliberal tendencies, we have right-wing forces. And here we also have some really clear political strategies. And we have to, as you have also given an example of, try to resist them with new ways of doing it. But it is a work, it is a constant work of, you can say, resistance and proposing different ways to do things.
Yeah, thank you for, I think, the very important point that all of this is very much in permanent negotiation. We also, as you say, in workplaces, in political contexts, issues related to gender, and also in academia. We discussed the last few days that some of us had the experience as students to still be addressed as Miss or Mademoiselle, and this is something that is, at least in Belgium, gone from what we're doing in the universities. We have someone. Okay, no. Yeah, okay. We have a question in the room. We'll get a microphone so that people can hear you at a distance as well. We've got a microphone going up the stairs. Yeah.
Oh, no one's ever complained about not hearing me. No, but how much is on the listener? Because I've had to work in negotiations in different international environments, and on average, I feel like it's intuit good intent until otherwise is proven, because most people show up with what's going on in their own head. They're not necessarily trying to, I mean, some people do try to provoke you, but even then, it's on you to remain unprovoked if the ultimate goal here is leaving the negotiation with a positive outcome. So just curious, because there's a lot of talking about like learning to speak better, and you know the speaker is obviously a part of this, right? But how much of it's on the listener to just assume good intent until otherwise disproven, or not to be provoked, as it were?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of it in it, and one of the reasons we wanted to hold this open conversation is to draw attention to it. I think a lot of the work when going to study, work, or negotiate, or whatever, in a context or a language that's not yours, a lot of that work is put on the speaker, right? So, which is in a way understandable, and I think as a speaker you want to try to think of how am I supposed to interact, to address people in a different context. But what you point out is, to me, very important as well. I think the listeners have some work to do too, to at least try to take into account, as you say, that there may not be ill intent in something that comes across as ill intent, or to try to find out what is really going on before judging. For me, that is a really important point. Yeah. Yeah, Mette, we'll let you add on.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, when I talk about negotiated practices, I don't talk about formal negotiations around a table that you might have in diplomatic settings. I talk about people that collaborate, interact, and here negotiation is something that happens implicitly, where you calibrate, you get to understand, well, one said that, but actually it was not meant in the way that I thought initially, and so on. Yeah, this is what I meant when I said negotiated practices. And what you referred to here in your question is indeed some of these settings where there's not always an aspiration to reach consensus and to move forward together. It can also just be about getting right, imposing what you think is right. Yeah, and I think that is very important to stress.
Okay, did that clarify your question? Oh, wait. Hang on, we're getting the microphone to the speaker. Yeah.
Because you also have
Yeah, okay. No, most of what I've done, I'm not around a table. It's just whether the other person, you're never going to convince somebody they're not right. So what can you still get out of the negotiation, and just even if it's just an interaction where at least you can either continue to work together or agree to end the relationship amicably, because I don't believe that I've never had the experience where the other person has suddenly been like, you're absolutely right, you've changed my whole worldview. That's never happened to me. So I just assume I have to operate as though we are going to have to operate together even if our worldviews differ on a specific issue. So I feel like as the listener, it's my job to intuit good intent until otherwise disproven, and not to be provoked. Not saying I'm successful in this in all ways, but on average, that's my assumption.
Okay. Mette, would you like to do a final reaction on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult really to react on it because I would say it depends very much on the setting you are in. It's very different to be in a diplomatic setting and then be into an informal setting, an educational environment. And you can say the ideal that we are all, you can say in a way, rational beings where we will agree and we will move on and we are nice to one another. This is an ideal. It doesn't exist. So, of course, when we interact also across all sorts of linguistic and cultural boundaries, of course, you also end in situation when there's no agreement possible. I think this is without any doubt. If we want an intercultural setting to work out and culture really to be one of these possible potentials for coming up with new ideas and so on that we hear about, then an effort on both sides needs to be done. And also you can say the setting, the organizational setting in which you are working also need to leave space for finding solution, negotiating and understanding one another. And I think that is important to keep in mind. But as Barbara has mentioned, and it's also in the presentation of the open conversation today, we can say that we rarely have these settings where there are no power asymmetries. They are always there. So it is, I would say, top thing to go into to work across cross-cultural boundaries and linguistic boundaries. But on the other hand, I don't think we have much choice. We won't all become alike. So we have to accept also the differences. And some would also say that address forms, politeness, all that are rituals that we invent as practices in order to live together, yeah? At least as ways to accept that some of these people that we work with, interact with, they're very different and they will remain very different.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we'll slowly have to start to closing the open conversation. Yeah, but we have to stop at 3. Sorry. So we have given a wide variety of contexts to show that these asymmetric relations, as Mette clearly pointed out, exist. We cannot avoid them, but maybe to help you see how diverse they can be and how they can be enacted in very different ways across the interactions we have. So thank you for your attention, for the people online and also in the room. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.